Hi guys, let me know if the audio is coming. I think one person has joined. Anyone who joins, let me know in the chats. Today we are going to discuss a technical paper written in the 1960s. What the hell? A paper written in 1960 by a Sanskrit scholar called Sukumari Bhattacharji. And this paper was published by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, which did the critical Sanskrit editions of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, of whose English translation is the ones by Bibek Debroy. So they have done 40, 50, 60 years of research and compiled those critical editions. They used a procedure which is similar to the highest common factor that we do in high school mathematics, which is there are so many versions of these texts lying around all across the country, right? Then there are so many lengths. Every version is of a different length. So how do we know which one is perfect and which texts are closest to the original ones, which may have been in the original one? So what they did is they just took the most commonly occurring shlokas, shuktas, etc. So, and whichever does not feature that commonly, they discarded as having concluded that they might have been later on additions and interpolations. So that institute has published this paper written by this woman in 1960. She has a Sanskrit master's and is fluent in Pali, Greek, many other languages as well. So I'm curious to find out what she has written in this paper. Even I haven't read it. We'll just discuss it as we go along, discussing the evolution of the character or the concept of Rudra from the Vedas to the Mahabharatas, because there is still some debate about whether Shiva and Rudra are the same concepts or the same person. I have heard equally trustable sources on both sides of this argument, so I don't have a conclusion yet because I haven't read as much yet on this topic. But let's check out what this paper says. If anyone hasn't arrived yet, doesn't matter, anyone can watch it later on. Okay, koi aa gaya, Rohan Shatra, Bengali boy aa gaya. So I'll keep checking out the paper and then people can keep joining in. So from Rudra from the Vedas to the Mahabharata by Sukumari Bhattacharji. Let's see what she says. And I hope a lot of Shiv Bhakts join so that we can get the authentic and the learned perspectives of the devotees themselves, because I have no idea about these things. Rudra is a comparatively unimportant god in the Rig Veda, with only 2.5 completed hymns to him and about 75 casual references in all in the entire Rig Veda. In the Rig Veda, he is mainly described as a physically attractive god with well-formed jaws, strong limbs, massive build, bold and powerful, of a whitish or tawny complexion, having a gold chain around his neck and brave like a bull. He has matted and braided hair, jata, full of elan, is a thunder bearer and is seated in a chariot. Happy Shivratri to you too. Hi Anurag. So, okay, we got 10 people. He is a benign giver of gifts, has healing power, is a father of the world, and destroyer of enemies. Prayer is offered to him so that healing may come to the family, as also for the welfare of cattle, whose protector he is. His associates are the Maruts, whom he begot in Prashni, let's see the 9. Okay, I can't read that. It's in Devanagari script. Prishni. The Maruts are quite frequently mentioned as his sons. That's a chapter, verse, line, paragraph number in Rig Veda. And that's where he's mentioned as this, as that Maruts are his sons. Rig Veda Go instead of Prishni is mentioned as the mother of the Maruts. Okay, Go instead of Prishni is mentioned as the mother of Maruts. The word Rudra has also been derived from a root meaning to howl. Rudra of Nirukta 10.3.2 Yadarudat Tadrudrasya Rudravatam Rudratvam. From all this emerges a powerful and benevolent god, like most of the gods in the earliest pantheon in the Rig Veda. He has a minor position, but in essence is not different from the major gods. He is attractive, not repulsive, fierce and powerful, yet with no dark or evil associations about him. He is prayed for protection and healing, and because he is so powerful, is supplicated to protect the devotee and charge his arrows away from him and his. Arrows away from him and his. As one is reminded of David Jehovah in the Psalms, fight against them that fight against me. Let destruction come upon him unawares. So this is a comparison with David Jehovah in Bible. The Samaveda gives us no new feature of the god. With the Yajurveda, we have a much more clearly delineated and at the same time a somewhat different picture of Rudra. New traits appear together with new names and epithets. He is the son of Swadhiti and has a sister Ambika. He is Triambaka. He is also Kritivas, Shiva, blue-throated, tawny, thousand-eyed, golden-armed, red, and wears a headgear. He is called by names which later become more familiar: Bhava, Shiva, Pashupati, Nilagriva, Shitikantha, Kapardin. His physical appearance, which was powerful and attractive before, undergoes such radical changes that it hardly resembles the other figures in the Rigvedic pantheon. So, it was already evolved. You see, after Rigveda, the description of Rudra changes drastically. দেবনাগরী শিখে নিন, গ্রন্থ পাঠ করতে সুবিধা হবে, এই তো সমস্যা আমার জীবনে। His physical appearance, which was powerful and attractive before, undergoes a radical change. The tawny, fair-limbed archer, seated in a chariot with a gold necklace around his neck, now becomes a dwarf with disheveled hair, aged, massive, and old. So I guess they are describing the gradual aging of Rudra. He is still copper complexioned and red. In Yajurveda, he is called Sambhanani Samskara, and suddenly becomes poor, Daridra, and is styled the blue and red one, the supreme one, the Ishana, and has a new name, Krivi. As Krivi means a leather bag, the name is directly associated with storm, cloud, lightning and rain, as is amply clear from verse 16:38-39. As healer, he becomes the first divine physician. Prayers are offered so that he averts his weapons from his worshipper. He is a bestower of gifts useful to an agrarian community, besides long life, wealth, food, prolificity, also healthy cattle, bodily strength, and good progeny. Prayer is also offered that he will ward off his wrath from the worshipper's parents, relatives, children, and cattle. For the first time also, Rudra is also addressed as a creator god. He becomes the overlord of the vegetation and animal world, together with all spheres of human life. All this is happening in Yajurveda. The list in KYV 16 adds a new series of associations which includes not only foreign but also contradictory features to those of the Rigvedic portrait of a formidable yet benign patron god. Yeah, so vast differentiations have appeared during the compilation of the Vedic texts. He now becomes the lord of thieves, robbers, cheats, the bald-headed, the night rovers, and the deformed. His worshipping base is shifting. Grace is sought from the benevolent aspect of the god. He remains the warrior armed with bow and arrows. That's the only thing that is constant. While in the Rig Veda, Rudra was generally associated with rivers, earth, water, trees, and mountains. He now has a particular habitat in the Mujavat hill. For his special attendant, Rudra has now a mouse. He now becomes the god of architects, counselors, and merchants. He shouts out loudly. Immediately after he is called the gracious and benevolent god of peace, the fierce and formidable aspects are particularly emphasized, and he is characterized as a frightful and merciless killer of even faraway enemies, the wounder, the destroyer, then suddenly the benign, the good, etc. The Satarudriya of the Yajurveda introduces certain dark, inauspicious, mysterious, and malevolent associations. Here, Rudra is worshipped in his macabre aspect. The obnoxious details of the entrails, the liver, and other such parts of the body are mentioned in this hymn. This again is a new Rudra, who besides being terrible and awe-inspiring, is almost horrible and loathsome. In the Atharva Veda, this Rudra is already a fixed assumption. Certain new details are added. As the Rigvedic Rudra remains the same in the Samaveda, the Atharva Rudra is also virtually the same as in the Yajurveda. The terrible and horrible features are now his regular characteristics. What is added is nothing entirely new, but only an extension or intensification of the already known trait. Blue tufts and 1,000 tufts are attributed to him. He is Sarva, Pashupati, Rudra, Bhava, and Mahadeva. He still is Jalasa Bhesaja, but as a healer, his task is now specified as extraction of arrows. He remains the divine physician. People pray to him to be healed. In verse 622, he is supplicated for the cure of consumption, and in 659 and 3, for the cure of cattle with medicinal herbs. In verse 690, there is probably a reference to rheumatism caused by his missiles. This dread god is now frequently mentioned, implored for protection, favor, and grace. Together with Soma, Rudra is invoked for remission of sins. Bhava and Sarva are together invoked for the expulsion of sins. Together with Yama and Mrityu, Rudra is invoked for the same purpose. He has a golden bow and a number of arrows. But Rudra is never associated as Indra. But Rudra is never associated, like in the case of Indra, with the warlike exploits of the Maruts, for he does not engage in conflict with the demons. This is a citation from Vedic mythology by MacDonald, page 74. Rudra, like Agni, is praised as an what is that word? Immanent. I don't know what's that word. And omnipresent deity. His animal associates have become more numerous and varied. Cows, horses, goats, sheep, crows, dogs, deer, ducks, snakes, vultures, birds, simsumaras, python, eagles, and aquatic animals. His dogs with gaping mouths are mentioned in a hymn. 2 whole hymns are addressed to him as the Lord of Animals. Rudra has always been a destroyer of animals, even in the Rig Veda. In the Atharva Veda, he remains so, and has become moreover a killer of demons. As Bhava and Prashnivahu, he is implored for the destruction of an enemy army. Pursuing the drift of the Vedas, we notice that not the gradual development of a Vedic deity along lines already laid down in the Rig Veda, but the metamorphosis of a minor yet recognizable Aryan god into a god who has both Aryan features and features which have to be called pre-Aryan. By pre-Aryan, they mean obviously, the Harappans probably, they think Harappans are pre-Aryan. The process starts in the Yajurveda with the introduction of the dark and malevolent traits. Shubho Shivratri. Dark and okay. Shubho Mahashivratri. Happy Mahashivratri, yes, everyone. So the introduction of the dark and malevolent traits in Rudra. If in the Rig Veda, Rudra is invoked with fear and trembling, It is not so much because he is ill-tempered and irate, but because irate meaning gets irritated easily, but because he is ill and irate, but because he is powerful and embodies those cosmic forces which, misdirected, may bring immense harm to the community. His associations with the Maruts and Prisni are clearly traceable to his essence as the rain-bearing god. Thus he is powerful and, to an agrarian community, a formidable god with god worth propitiating for wealth and prosperity of men and cattle. Good evening, agnostic Chele. Thus he is powerful and, to an agrarian community, a formidable god worth propitiating for wealth and prosperity of men and cattle. He has a human form, that of an archer in a chariot with bows and arrows, and a necklace around his neck. An altogether attractive figure. With the Yajurveda, this god imbibes traits which emphasizes his might in such a way that from an awe-inspiring god, he gradually becomes a sinister deity. Where have these traits come from? A non-Aryan mountain deity, who obviously had associations with storm, cloud and rain, has lent some of his characteristics to Rudra. Both Rudra and his new counterpart are mighty storm gods, but there the similarity ends. As a result, new and dark associations step into the concepts of Rudra. He is called by other names: Sarva, Bhava, Ugra, Krivi, Nilashikanda, Sitikantha and Kapardin. This association with blue, and later blue-red, is entirely new. He still is a healer, but also becomes lord of the plants, herbs, trees and even of the world. The utterly foreign and anti-Rigvedic attributes are introduced here. He is a dwarf with disheveled hair, he is old and poor. At the same time, he is invoked as an auspicious god bringing blessings. In other words, we are no longer concerned with the homogeneous aspect of Rudra, but that of two concepts telescoped. Here, the most important aspect of the later Rudra appears in his dual nature, because in the process of assimilation of new traits, the old Rudra is not yet lost sight of. So even though the new characteristics are coming, the old Rudra has not been forgotten. The old conceptualization, the earlier conceptualization of Rudra. The resulting Rudra is a mysterious being with two contradictory sets of attributes. He is Rudra and Shiva, Ugra and Shambhu, Bhima and Samkara, Hantar, what's that word? It's wiped out, I can't read that. Mayaskara, Hanyas and Sivatara. In the Yajurveda and not in the Rig Veda, we have all the germs which later create the complex germs. We have all the germs which later create the complex Rudra Shiva of the gems, I think it's supposed to be. I don't know what word that is. Complex Rudra Shiva of the epics and Puranas. The gruesome associations multiply, because in some prayers, the entrails and the loathsome parts of the body of the sacrificial victims are offered to him, presumably because he delights in them. Liver, kidney, ये सब offering हो रहा है, चढ़ावा जा रहा है शिवा को, रुद्रा को. On the other hand, from a minor god, he is increasing in stature, gradually. He is increasing in stature, for he becomes the god of various professions. The architects, the merchants, all find a god in him. On the one hand, he clearly becomes a mountain-dwelling god, and on the other, he is the central deity who, while retaining overlordship of the vegetation and animal world, has through realized his potentialities and has become a major and significant god of an expanding city-dwelling people of merchants and craftsmen. Because now actually the society is also evolving by the time this Veda is written. Because from an agrarian economy, now cities are emerging, which is why it's actually more of a proof that Harappa was a Hindu society. On the one hand, he clearly becomes a mountain-dwelling god, and on the other, he is the central deity who, while retaining overlordship of the vegetation and animal world, has through realizing his potentialities become a major and significant god of an expanding city-dwelling people of merchants and craftsmen. This constructive side is a direct product of his beneficial aspect of Yate Rudra Shiva Tanu. He is invoked for long life, growth and healing over food, fields, forests, trees, herbs, animals, and paths. He is given a new animal follower. The mouse Akhushte Pasu. Swadhiti is his father, Prishni or Go, the earth, his wife, the Maruta, his sons, and Ambika, his sister. These relations have gradually accumulated. In both Yajurveda and Atharva Veda, but not in the Rig Veda, he is called the creator god. So Rudra is not the creator in Rig Veda. Rudra becomes the creator god in Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. Ajke shobai ki khecho. He's asking what have all of us eaten. So everyone comment what all you guys have eaten. This is evidently due to the increase of his dimensions. He's being transformed from a minor Rigvedic god to a major later Vedic god. This mutation continues and the duality of his nature becomes sharper. The creator god is also the god of thieves and cheats. The overlord of the inanimate and animate world is a poor old bulky figure associated with demons and monsters, with matted locks and clad in a leather loincloth. The sinister side is emphasized and the mystic associations multiply. Different kinds of variations of Rudra. Brahmanas and Sutras Rudra is regarded as isolated from the other gods. When the gods attained heaven, Rudra remained behind. This Vedic Rudra undergoes a change more thorough and complete in the epics. Of course, the process continues through the Brahmanas and Sutras, but when we reach the epics, we find an almost new god, though traces of the old guise still persist. When Arjuna praises Shiva in 339 for Pasupatsatra, he praises a supreme god with the attributes of creator, preserver and destroyer, shining with resplendent glory, with a third eye in the forehead, invincible, the destroyer of Daksha's sacrifice, of Bhaga's eye, etc. Or again in the Tilottama episode, when staring at her, Shiva became four-headed. The most typical description of the epic Shiva is found in these verses 720, 118, 138, where his forms are both brilliant and formidable. He is also very powerful and powerful. He is so very powerful that Narayana could see him only after he had practiced penance for thousands of years. And when he finally saw him, Shiva was Rudra, Isanas, Rasabha, Hara, Shambhu, the awakener, the supreme being of fierce wrath, the destroyer of everything, armed with divine bow, arrows, and golden armor, with the pitaka, thunder, a blazing pike, club, trident, and a sword. He was white with the moon in his head, dressed in tiger skin, with a stick in his hand. Now the symbolisms that we are used to seeing, they now appear. He was white with the moon in his hand, with a stick in his hand, dressed in tiger skin, with armlets and snake thread around his trunk, surrounded by supernatural hosts, seated with his pretty consort Parvati. Then Narayana sings a typical hymn to him, addressing him as creator, preserver and destroyer, the alpha and the omega, the subtle, the abstract principle beyond being, prototype of all creation, past, present and future, the omnipresent and the omnipotent being. महाशिवरात्रि की शुभकामनाएं भाइयों. Yes, same to you. महाशिवरात्रि की शुभकामनाएं तुमको भी. My friend used to ask this question whenever we used to meet to play in childhood. Used to take me aback. Okay, so the Shiva that we know appears as Rudra in later Vedic texts. This then is the Rudra with light minor modifications, that is additions and alterations that we meet in the epics. The sum total of all fundamental creative principles, together with certain apparently irreconcilable concrete details. In the next chapter, when Arjuna asks Krishna who the shining figure armed with the that word has been wiped out, I can't read it, with the spike. Who was the shining figure with armed with the spike was, when Arjuna asks Krishna, who went before him killing enemies even before Arjuna's weapons touched them, who was very black and whose feet did not touch the earth, from whose what's that, Sula, some word, Sula flew 1,000 others and hit the foe. Who was this? Arjuna asked Krishna. Krishna told him it was none other than Samskara Isana and Mahadeva, the three-eyed one with tuft in his hair, clad in rags. The underlying principle of all that be has been and shall, that is, he has a blue neck, a hand gear, is of a fine face with 1,000 eyes, the mountain in his habitat, his arms are golden, he is dressed in grasses and herbs, yet is the best of beings, like the bull. He not only possesses a bow and arrows, but is excessively fond of them. Shiva has two forms. He is Trayambaka for being the lord of three goddesses. He is Shiva because he offers sacrifices, desiring good to mankind in all spheres. Vyamakesha because his hair is nothing but the brilliant splendor of the sun and the moon. Vrishakapi because dharma is called Vrisha. Hara because he robs Brahmins, Indra, Varuna and Kuvera. Rudra because he's Rudra because he is composed of all that consumes, all that is sharp, fierce and powerful in flesh, blood and marrow. The epithets Suin, Jatila, thousand-eyed, bark-clad, powerful, three-eyed, blue-throated, pig-skin, tawny, smoke-colored, invincible, blue-tufted, destroyer, preserver, distributor of wealth, husband of Ambika, golden-armored, these are all mentioned in these verses. He is called golden or Hiranmaya in verse 148-22 with an eye on the forehead, Lalataksa, Sarva Ganesha in these verses. He has 11 forms and again 8 forms. Different variations. Then in verse 12 to 84 to 12, he has 3 locks of matted hair, 3 heads with a 3-pointed pike. In the same chapter, he is characterized as fond dance offerings, Natyopaharalubdha, and the patron of music and singing, Gita Vaditrapalin, with 10 hands, Dasavahu, with hands in his head, Kapalahasta, fond of ashes of the burning pyre, Chittibhasma Priya, word-tongued, Khadgajivha, with a deformed face, Vikrita Vaktra, with an antelope skin for his upper garment, Krishna Jinottariya, with a stout but decayed body and with matted hair, Thulasjarna Jatila, with locks shining like a blazing sun and fire, Dipta Suryagni Jatila. Then suddenly in verse 56 we are reminded that Shiva was once a storm god, for he is still called masses of clouds, lightning and the rumbling of clouds. In verse 323 he is said to be wearing a garland of Karnikara blossoms. In verse 13:27-32 Upamanyu describes his vision of Shiva to Krishna and says that he saw him skin-clad, with matted tufted hair, deer-eyed and destroyer of all creatures. Then again, concealed in the guises of a lunatic, Unmatiya Vaser Pachana, the preserver of all creatures, Sarvaloka Prajapati, bull-shaped, Vrisarupa, large-jawed, Mahahanu or Mahabhanu, I don't know. It is also hinted that his actual form dwarfs and defies his actual form dwarfs, so it decreases in size and defies description. Side by side with his description was an attractive and impressive god runs another strain which characterizes him as fox-shaped and fox and lion-shaped and even banyan tree-shaped. So parallelly these two descriptions are going on. In verse 58 in the same chapter are arrayed the usual epithets Sikhin, Mundin, Jatila, and then are added burning and born of a murti. What's that? Some words are disappeared. Burning and born of a I don't know what's that. One who walks on his head, insincere, bird and wing shaped, a lunatic, Jivalin, Murtija, Murdhvaga, Khisalin, Pakshin, Paksharupa, Unmada. That is which means mad, or angry and mad. Lunatic. He has abnormal size and a deformed shape described in a vivid and macabre fashion. In verse 13, 17, 86, 89, where most of his limbs are mentioned as disproportionately large. Can anyone tell me when does day starts for us Hindus, after 12 am or after the Brahma Muhurat? Distributor of wealth, was Shiva a communist? Yes. But with consent. I don't think it would be recommended that Shiva forces people to first become wealthy, then again rob their wealth and distribute to other people. So the person Bhim, what you are asking, Abhay has just replied to you on this topic. We are reading a paper on the evolution of Rudra, not whether Rudra and Shiva are different or not. That's all seems so far. The evidence, at least written by this particular person, Sukumari Bhattacharji, she has described it with the basic premise that yes, they are definitely different. We are seeing what are the evidences of the evolution of the concept of Rudra. Right now we are in Vedas. We'll get to Mahabharata. This is a 44-page paper and we'll do the entire thing tonight. He lies in ashes. So the basic gist is so far that in Rig Veda he's just a minor god. In Yajurveda, Atharva Veda, later Vedic texts, Rudra's description changes, but he becomes a very significant, all-encompassing, all-powerful god, deity. But it's also not forgotten what were the characteristics of the early Rigvedic Rudra. Those still remain. On top of that, more characteristics are added on him. He lies in ashes, preserves the world with ashes, is a Gandharva, Aditi, and Garuda. He's extremely irate, which means short-tempered, and a charmer. Also, Ahiruvidnya, Skanda, and Kuvera. He is very fond of song and dance and is worshipped by Apsaras. The names Hara, Mridas, Shiva, and Samkara are frequently used in the later Sutra literature, presumably because the quote-unquote the great and red god must be treated as suspicious in order to make him so in point of fact. The religion and philosophy of the Veda and Upanishads. He is called Ithyphalic. He is fair, dark and black, bull-shaped with a black tail, with sweet brown eyes. His pinaka bow is described in great detail, Sula and Parashu. In answer to Parvati's question, he explains the functions of his four faces. With the eastern one, he performs Indra's task. With the northern, he enjoys Uma's company. The western face is auspicious to all creatures, and with the southern, malignant face, he destroys all creation. Indra had hurled his thunderbolt, which scalded his neck, and thenceforth he was called Srikantha. This description of Shiva does not correspond to that of the Vedic Rudra. What was drawn merely as a sketch has now become fuller with new dimensions and details of attire, weapons, hair, face, head, eyes, ornaments. The old picture has disappeared. He is no longer one figure but many figures pressed together. And what is stranger still, he is at the same time the negation of these new epithets and attributes. Interesting. Shiva was a hunter and a hero in the Rig Veda, Yajurveda and Atharva Veda. He still is that, but his hunting fame is now established, referred to as a thing of the past. In the Kirata Arjuna episode, Arjuna said that none other can bear the shower of his shafts except the bearer of the Pinaka bow. Again, he is referred to as the equal of Krishna and Arjuna. Satyaki's fierce fighting and slaughter are compared to the slaughter of the animals by Shiva. The divine to whom his clans of prayers, Mrigara Suktani, is addressed most frequently is Rudra Shiva, that is Agni, under the large variety of names of embodiments, that is Murti, customary with that divinity. When did Shiva slay animals so ruthlessly? We have no account. From the preserver and lord of cattle to this merciless slaughterer of cattle is a far cry. Of course, prayers have been offered to him as early as the Rig Veda for the protection of cattle, and he was ever an angry god, but no such slaughter was ever mentioned. And here too, this is mentioned in similes as if it was already part of established tradition. So, whoever was writing those particular shuktas, it was for them it was already an agreed upon premise that yes, he has slaughtered many animals. Brahman paid compliment to Shiva's marksmanship meaning how good his aim was, marksmanship and archery in verse 8:33-42, where with reference to the three cities, he says that none but Sthanu can pierce them with one shot. The gods are ordered to placate this matchless archer. Ashwathaman says that he will behave towards the Panchalas as the Pinakapani did towards the animals. Okay. Shiva is referred to as a general, as hunter and archer, the killer of elephants and demons. Lord Shiva was fair. Yes, at least in Rig Veda he is described as fair. In the later Vedas his skin color becomes blue. Earlier he was fair. Remember in even Shiv Tandav Stotram it's mentioned that Jata Kataha Pingala. So Pingal means yellowish color. So some people have I think it means that his jata is supposed to be of yellow color, blonde maybe. That's why these Aryan concepts come in. At what time exactly is Brahma Muhurtam? No idea. Okay. As in the Samaveda and Atharva Veda, he still is the lord of the animal and vegetable world. Frequent mentions in descriptive phrases bear testimony to this. He is the lord of clouds, creatures, trees, cows, forests and waters. As Pashupati, he protects animals and is happy with them as their overlord. He is identified with certain trees and is also a cowherd clad in cowhide. Praful Raut, ye kya good morning emoji hai kya? As Pashupati, he protects animals and is happy with them as their overlord. He is identified with certain trees and is also a cowherd clad in a cowhide. He can assume various forms, especially those of foresters, savaras, yakshas, rakshasas, sunakas, daityas, and danavas and hole dwellers. Then follows a list of the creatures whose shape Shiva can assume. He is the lion of the animals and of the village animals, and of the village animals, he is the bull. Shiva's habitation is more localized and more distinctly mentioned, for unlike other gods, he is a dweller of the north and has his home down on his earth instead of in heaven. Many and varied are the references to his habitat, but sifting them, we come to certain conclusions. For example, while the other gods abide in the east, the place of the rising sun, his place is in the Himalayas, in the north, in Munjavat, Munjabata or Munjaprastha. When Uma asks him why he has chosen the cremation ground as one of his habitats, he replies that no place is more sanctified. As a natural corollary, Agni Dev is the first deity that is addressed to in the Rig Veda, right? So there's fire. Fire also destroys. And then after that is destroyed, it's the ashes. Hence the destruction which causes purity, because it acts like a disinfectant, therefore maybe this version of Rudra likes to lie around ashes. When Uma asks him why he has chosen the cremation ground as one of his habitats, he replies that no place is more sanctified. So remember, in Harappan civilization, people used to be buried. Maybe after that they decide that no, it's more better, a healthier option, more less chances of infection, etc., less chances of disease if you burn the dead, and maybe ask the Agni Dev or the destroyer to take care of all the bad things in the body. Maybe that's how cremation started, because it wasn't always done so. When Uma asks him, so cremation ground as one of his habitats, he replies that no place is more sanctified. This is a very important point. As a natural corollary, follow his associations with death and decay. We have a vivid description of his sinister place. I don't think it should be death and decay. Obviously, I don't have as much evidence as the author, but I think it can be looked upon as a purification angle. That the fire that causes purity, that kills all disease, germs, etc. We have a vivid description of this sinister place. Various spots in the northern region and a few elsewhere have been specially mentioned as pilgrimages to the Shiva devotee, and naturally those are spots where he dwells. Har Har Mahadev. His association with and overlordship of nature are indicated by phrases which make him dwell beneath trees, on uneven places, mountain peaks, in caves, and in water, and also among grass and herbs. In Krishna Yajurveda, we are told that he haunts lonely forests and is seen by cowherds and maidens drawing water. He is also supposed to practice penance in water. Let me drink some water. One of Shiva's functions in the epic is to give weapons and gifts to supplicants. After Arjuna had taken the vow to kill Jayandratha on the morrow, he, at Krishna's advice, praised Shiva for favor so that he might fulfill the vow. Shiva gave him the Pashupata weapon. The Brahmasiras weapon is given to Arjuna, and Shiva teaches him the mystery and use of it. Reference to it is again found in verse 391:11. The story of Pashupatastra is repeated in verse 3:168, 1856. There is a strange tale of Duryodhana. When he was dejected over his discomfiture before the Gandharvas and the consequent loss of prestige before the Pandavas, the demons offer a sacrifice. Summon Duryodhana and tell him that he is a gift to them from Shiva after the latter had been propriated by their penance. Again, when the Kashi princess was practicing penance, Shiva appeared and granted her desire. She would be born as King Drupada's son and kill Bhishma to avenge himself. Drupada's queen was childless and had prayed to Shiva, who had blessed her with a child, who would be born as a daughter but would later become a son. What? Who would be born as a daughter but would later become a son. Krishna had reassured Arjuna that the gods would be gracious to him, since he had challenged no less a god than the terrible Shiva, who is normally invisible to the mortal eye. The Shakti weapon which Yudhishthira hurled at Salya was supposed to have been fashioned by Tvastra on Shiva's behalf. In order to encourage Yudhishthira, Krishna tells him that when propitiated, that is when prayed to, Shiva will grant even immortality and such weapons as would that would slay even Rudra. if you pray hard at Shiva, he will grant you immortality, and he will even give you weapons that can even slay Indra. Parashurama had gained his famous weapon by pleasing Shiva at mountain Gandhamadana. Again, when there was chaos and anarchy in the world, Brahman approached Shiva and asked for danda, punishment, who created it through meditation. When the sword was created out of sacrificial fire, Brahman gave it to Shiva, who first danced with joy and was transfigured and became terrible and awe-inspiring. His host sang and danced and put up a macabre show, macabre meaning very dark and deathly show. Later Shiva handed it over to Vishnu. Okay, remember these interpretations that it was a macabre show. I don't think these are mentioned in the text. Okay, these are the interpretations of the author. So you don't have to take these particular conclusions very seriously. Others we can, whatever she's basing on the text. But these are conclusions that she is drawing based on her upbringing, etc. So it might not, you don't have to be sure that it was definitely a macabre show. Where do you live? Aaj Halabar Bajrangbali sticker. Yes, the Bajrangbali sticker has been reinstalled on that flight. Jai Shri Ram, Jai Hanuman. Yeah, she was Draupadi's sister Shikhandi. She turns male and participates in Kurukshetra. I see. Yes, see, I am the only YouTuber in the world whose audience is more educated than him. This is why I have such a fascinating time doing live streams. In when it comes to Indian text, I am almost uneducated. You guys know way more than me. I am just confident discussing economics in layman's terms and some American politics. So, okay, we read this part. Later, Shiva handed it over to Vishnu. In the vulture and jackal episode, Shiva, at Parvati's request, took pity on the dead child and revived it in verse 1253, etc. Krishna Dvaipayana, desiring a worthy son, pleased Shiva with penance and received Shuka. Isn't Krishna Dvaipayana the Ved Vyasa who wrote the Mahabharata? Because as Vivek Debroy was saying, Vyasa or Veda Vyasa was not a person, was a post, like Dalai Lama. Different people can become the Dalai Lama, different people become the Buddha, etc. So Krishna Dvaipayan was one of the Veda Vyasas who wrote Mahabharata. So Krishna Dvaipayana, desiring a worthy son, pleased Shiva with penance and received Shuka. Shiva himself performed the initiation ceremony for the newborn. Again, when Shiva finds the father grieved at his son's early liberation and consequent detachment, he consoles the father, saying that such was the son the latter had desired, and promised undying fame to him. Whether hyperbolically or realistically, Shishupala, the king of Chedi, has been called Shiva's incarnation. Shiva it was who had blessed the Nivata Kavachas. In verse 13, 14, 73, there is a list of gifts and boons bestowed by Shiva to different people at different times. Thus we hear of Hiranyakashipu and his sons Mandara, of Vishnu and his Sudarshana Chakra, the demon Satamukha, the Swayambhuva Kratu, and the gift of 1,000 sons, of Vedavyasa who won fame, the Balakilyas, Atri's wife who won sons in the absence of her husband, of Shakalya and Savarni who became authors of Indra's recovery of the heavenly kingdom, and Narada gaining eternal fame and power. Let's see some comments. Yeah, Krishna Dvaipayana was Vedavyasa. Yes. Guys, nice. You all know this. Narada gaining eternal fame and power. Upamanyu tells his own tale. He was Vyaghrapada, a sage's son in the Krita Yuga. He had asked his mother for payasa, and had received only payas. Okay, we call it payas. This is I forgot what is the English of payash in the Bengali payash. He had asked his mother of payasa and received only rice paste something, as they were too poor to afford the real thing. When he was grieved, his mother told him to beg Shiva for it, and She herself introduced the god to him by singing a hymn to him. We are talking about Upamanyu here. Introduced the god to him by singing a hymn to him. Upon this, he practiced penance for 3,000 years. Shiva appeared in Indra's guide, but the supplicant refused to receive anything from anybody except Shiva and surrendered himself utterly to the god, who then had to shake off the disguise and offer him any boon he chose. He chose unflinching devotion to Shiva. Krishna also hears testimony to Shiva's gift. He himself got sons through Rukmini by pleasing Shiva. Then Jambuvati had also asked for sons. Krishna went to Shiva again, where Upamanyu the devotee told him to practice penance. Upamanyu told Krishna to practice penance. Later, Uma granted a son to him. We have a second list of gifts distributed to different sages by Shiva. It records the episodes of Vyasa, Valmiki, Jamadagnya, Vishwamitra, Asita Devala, Gristamada, Gritasmada, Vasudeva, Jagisavya, Garga, who received the 64 arts, Parasara, Animandsivya, and Galava. Pleased Shiva may give away the kingship of heaven itself. Of Shiva's explicits, the ones most frequently referred to are his burning of the 3 cities and his destruction of Daksha's sacrifice, of Tripura Dahana. Yes. He had destroyed Tripura. Not this Tripura, at least a mythological Tripura. But there's the Unakoti hills in Tripura, which shows that Shiva had turned his followers into stone when he woke up in the morning. They had all been turned to stone or something. That's the Unakoti hills video I talked about. So, of Tripura Dahana, there are actually 3 full accounts and many stray references strewn in the whole of the epic. The first account is found in verse this and that, verse 7, 201. It says that 3 demon brothers, Kamalaksha, Trisharkaksha, and Vidyumadin, I can't read that letter, Vidyumadin built 3 cities of gold, silver, and iron respectively, and had become virtually invincible and invulnerable through Brahman's blessing. Naturally, they started tormenting gods and men, so that gods in dire distress approached Shiva for their destruction. Shiva agreed, but said that he required physical and metaphysical equipment for the task. These secured, he waited for 1,000 years till the cities revolving in mid-air fell in one line, and then with one single arrow he pierced them. When the cities burned, Parvati came to see with a child in her arms. Indra grew jealous of the feat, and immediately his arms were paralyzed. The gods approached Brahman, who revealed that the child was none other than the mighty god Shiva. They bowed to him, and he restored strength to the paralyzed limb. We hear of the weapon with which he burned cities. In verse 3, 173 is the account of Arjuna destroying Hiranyapura through Shiva's blessing. Another verse in 13:14-62 says that Shiva destroyed the cities with a single arrow and with complete ease. The second version of Tripura Dahana is found in 8:33-34. Here the demon kings of the cities are 3 sons of Taraka, blessed with invincibility. Here, prior to Shiva's taking charge of the affair, the gods made futile attempt. They then approached Shiva, who said that they should make a joint effort. At this, the gods replied that the demons were twice as powerful as all of them taken together. Then Shiva borrowed half of their total strength. A unique chariot is fashioned and equipped with material and abstract accessories. This being complete, he asks them for a charioteer who was superior to him. They appointed Brahman. While the chariot starts to move, Shiva's bull roars and the chariot sinks from the commotion. Then Vishnu, in the share of another bull, rescues it. Now stringing his bow, Shiva concentrates, awaiting the moment when the cities will fall in a line. When this happens, he shoots his arrow. Terrific tumult and destruction follow. Yet another episode tells us of one Bhima, ruler of the demons, who ignored dharma and thus created havoc. The demons under him had become bold and iniquitous, so in order to punish them, Shiva, at the gods' request, destroyed them with one arrow. Sangam Talks Bangla channel. I had no idea Sangam Talks has a Bengali channel. What the hell? I need to check it out. And that too, Vivek Debra's lecture. I'll have to check it out. The next important feat of Shiva is his destruction of Daksha's sacrifice. Of this too, we have three distinct accounts. The first is in verse 7, 201, line 52, page 52 to 62, where it is briefly narrated as to how Daksha had not at first set spare a share for Shiva in his sacrifice, and so the god destroyed it in his wrath. Daksha was then convinced of his divinity. A fuller account is found in 1018, where it says that when Shiva was angry with Brahman for transferring the commission to create from him to another, he retired to Munjavat. Then the gods, not Daksha, offered a sacrifice, leaving Shiva out of their account because they were ignorant of his true stature. They offered a sacrifice but left Shiva out of it. So Shiva made a bow out of Lokayagya and Nriyagya, and Vasatkara became the bowstring. Armed with this, Shiva came to the venue of the sacrifice and, in a consuming indignation, shot the sacrifice in the heart. It fled in the shape of a deer. Shiva followed it. The earth shook. The gods fainted, and in the chaos that resulted, Shiva cast out Bhaga's eyes, lopped off Savitri's arms, knocked out Pushana's teeth, and besieged the gods. Then words uttered by the immortals caused the string to fall off the bow. The gods propitiated him, which means prayed to him, and he cast his anger in a pool where it remains as fire and dries up the water. At last Shiva restored the lost limbs to Bhaga, Pushan and Savitra, as well as the sacrifice to Daksha, and what is more, the gods recognized his right to sacrificial offering. The longest account of this episode is found in 12 to 82 to 3. Here Parvati saw the procession of the gods moving towards Daksha's sacrifice. Shiva explained the situation to her. Quote, "Gods have foreordained that I should have no share in the sacrifice." End quote. Then observing her mortification. Then observing her mortification, he said, "Wait," and mustering his host, rushed towards the sacrifice and utterly destroyed it. The sacrifice assumed the shape of a deer and fled. Then as Shiva pursued it, his sweat fell on the ground, and out of it sprang a dwarf, whose march shook the earth. It was Jada. Brahman requested Shiva to divide it up, as the earth could not bear it whole. He did so, and we have various maladies of men, demons and animals. Shaking from fever, Vritra yawned and Indra hurled his thunderbolt. Pretty action-packed descriptions are going on. In chapter 83, we have a slight variation of the same theme. This episode adds that Dadhika uttered words of caution and admonition when Daksha proposed leaving. Okay, people have probably left because the internet was down, but it's back now. I'll just announce it once again. Okay, I'll continue discussing the paper. Hello. Okay. Is everyone offline? Is anyone watching anymore? I wonder. Otherwise we'll continue it next day only. Let me know if anyone is still online, okay? Just joined. Okay, great. You missed about 1 hour of stream, but we are discussing a paper, a 44-page history paper written by a scholar who is fluent in Sanskrit, Greek, Pali, etc. This paper is from 1960, discussing the evolution of the idea, concept of Rudra in different Vedas and then up till Mahabharata. Rudra used to be a minor god in Rig Veda, but then becomes an all-important, all-encompassing, very powerful god, deity in later Vedas. So in chapter 83, we have a slight variation of the same theme. This episode adds that Dadhika uttered words of caution and admonition when Daksha proposed leaving Shiva out of the account, saying that then it would neither be righteous nor a sacrifice worth the name. He then asked them to watch out for Shiva's approach and cursed and prophesied destruction. Then Shiva created a demon, Virbhadra, and a demoness, Bhadrakali, who did their master's bidding and completely smashed the sacrifice. The gods asked in terror and consternation, "Who are you?" The demon replied that he was Virbhadra and she was Bhadrakali, born of Shiva's and Uma's wrath. Then Daksha, together with the gods, worshipped Shiva, who suddenly rose from the fire and redressed Daksha's loss. Still another variant says that Shiva destroyed Daksha's sacrifice at Dadhichi's request and sent his burning trident, which consumed everything. Reference to this is found again in 12.340-25, where the story is given in a nutshell, and the only addition is that Shiva came by his third eye as a consequence of Daksha's wrath. Another reference is made in 13.132, which says that Indra became supreme by slaying Vritra and Shiva by slaying the sacrifice. Okay, Indra became supreme by slaying Vritra and Shiva became supreme by slaying the sacrifice. Shiva is further credited with another murder, that of Andhaka. Brief, almost passing references to this feat are made in verses 282, 111, 7, 200. Mention should also be made of what was perhaps already an extinct custom, referred to only once in the epic, vis-a-vis human sacrifices to Shiva. When Jarasandha wishes to offer human sacrifices to Shiva in order to gain his favor, Krishna and his party question him, "How can you, a king yourself, offer innocent kings to Samkara. Among his more peaceful enterprises may be mentioned his holding of the river Ganges as it fell from the sky. When Bhagiratha decides to usher it to the earth, the river asks him to beg Shiva to hold her, as none other was capable of the task. Shiva agrees and does so. He is mentioned as Vidhraka. Mankanaka, the sage of old, was wounded with the blade of a kusha grass, and vegetable juice came out of the wound. He danced with joy. This provoked the gods, who appealed to Shiva to do something to stop his exultation. Shiva, in compliance with their request, went before Mankanaka and pricked his own finger, from which dropped ashes. This put Mankanaka out, who in due humility submitted to and praised him. This same episode is repeated in 938-39. Manakanaka danced at the sight of the Sakrasa, and all the earth shook at the dance. Then the gods and sages approached Shiva, who asked who asked him the reason of his jubilation. Mankanaka told him Shiva showed him ashes from his own wound, and the sage worshipped him. In the epic, Shiva is quite frequently styled as the supreme being. Passages where Narayana's vision of him as the highest being is vividly described strike a somewhat new note. Even in the Yajurveda, Rudra had been occasionally called the highest, but here Narayana, the god of a parallel stature in the epic pantheon, sees him as the creator, preserver, and destroyer, as the final principle, beyond whom there is nothing and in whom everything consists, and all contradictory principles converge. So earlier he used to be, in Yajurveda, Rudra had been occasionally called the highest. He was just highest. Now it's more detailed that yes, he is the final, he is the finality, he is everything, everything is in him. All contradictory principles reside in him, beyond whom there is nothing and in whom consists everything and all contradictory principles. As the apocalyptic vision continues in the next chapter, we have a further revelation of Shiva as the highest. Earlier in verse 7, 78, 41, 47, when Arjuna sees a vision of Shiva, he sees the god as the unborn creator of the elements as well as the destroyer. In the Kirata episode, 3 attributes are emphasized. Krishna describes Shiva to Yudhishthira as the beginning, middle, and end, in and through whose movement the world moves. He is the cause, effect, action, and instrument. He is the cause, effect, action, and instrument. Existent and non-existent are but his being and non-being. He is the eater of the food and the food himself, its giver and consumer, its creator, cook, and consumer. In the same vein, it runs in passages like 12 to 84, etc. In verse 127, it says that Shiva is the foremost of the gods. After the creation is destroyed with fire, Shiva pervaded it. Upamanyu tells Krishna that Shiva is the supreme god. Shiva bore the Vedas with the subsidiary arrows, I guess, and sciences of the past, present, and futures. Shiva's supremacy in all spheres, his overlordship of the material and spiritual world, of the temporal and the eternal, of the mortal and the immortal, these have been emphasized. The god of a parallel stature to Shiva's in the epic is Narayana, and Shiva's relationship with him is rather ambiguous. Historically, the most important facts are his identity with Vishnu, but at the same time, the absence of Trinitarian interpretation except in one late passage. Shiva's relationship with Vishnu becomes intelligible only if we bear in mind that the Shaiva and the Vaishnava acts were vying with each other in proclaiming that the god of each sect was supreme. These are passages stating that the two gods are fundamentally one. This essential unity is stated in verse 12 to 34, 22, 27, where it says that when Narayana is worshipped, Rudra is worshipped in him, for the twain are but one. When Nara and Narayana challenge Shiva, he hurls his trident, which hits Narayana's chest, and burning the hair there returns to Shiva. Shiva then rushes towards the two sages. Narayana takes him by the throat. Which becomes dark at the touch. There was a fight between Rudra and Narayana. All nature suffered, and Brahman, together with the gods, came and requested Rudra to make peace. They did so. Rudra praised Narayana, who said, "He who knows thee knows me. He who knows thee follows me." At the second stage of creation, Brahman got dharma with Narayana as its essence and gave it to Shiva, who in his turn handed it over to the Balakilyas and disappeared. Let's see, how much have we read already? Page numbers are not mentioned anywhere. Okay, pages 85 to 128. Which page are we in? 106. Okay. We've almost read about half of it. Interesting. Shiva's associates, as they were introduced in the Satya Yajurveda, I forgot what's the S for. Yajurveda and Atharva Veda are still essentially the same. They have only gained in details and have become increasingly repugnant and even obnoxious. They are dwarfish, that is the characteristics of Shiva and his associates. His associates have become increasingly repugnant and obnoxious. They are dwarfish with matted locks, bald-pated, short-necked, pot-bellied, gigantic in size, fiercely energetic, big-eared, with deformed faces and feet, outlandishly dressed. By such is Shiva worshipped. This description goes on in the same vein through verses 1921 and 48. In verse 778, they are described as bright, thousand-eyed, and with deformed limbs. Two of his followers are described as grey-eyed and red and blue when they pick up the snake weapon from the lake. In 3:173, 46, 55, Arjuna sees hideous figures and he hurls a missile at the three-eyed one. These associates are animals, snakes, demons, nymphs, and men also. After Skanda's coronation, Shiva left in kingly splendor, followed by his terrible retinue, as did Parvati, followed by her terrible retinue. In verse 271, when Jayadratha propitiates Shiva, which means praise to Shiva, he says that Jayadratha cannot defeat the Pandavas because they have Krishna for an ally. So except Arjuna, the rest will be defeated. With this, he retires with his associates, who are dwarfish, fierce, hunchbacked, frightful to see and hear, awful with many weapons. Once the goddess of learning saw Shiva surrounded by his followers, some with faces like tigers, lions, bears, cats, maksaras. Is that supposed to be spider? Vrishadamsas, elephants, camels, owls, vultures, jackals, ravens, pigeons, deer, dogs, sheep, shalyakas, ichuemon, goats, and various other creatures. The description is continued in verse 945 and 76 to 111. These are typical descriptions of the retinue of deformed creatures and creatures from all species with disproportionate limbs, who are shockingly dressed and who dwell in crematoria, who follow guard and worship Shiva. In verse 946, this host reappears, but this time they have both pleasant and fierce features. In 10/7/1649, this host is in action. They have human and animal faces, are either singing or dancing or perpetrating repugnant and gruesome rites, gulping blood and lumps of fat and feasting on flesh and entrails. Entrails means antriya, kidney, liver, etc., guts. Some have come to resemble Shiva through worshipping him. Some people have started looking like Shiva by worshipping him. In 14:8-132, the deformed followers are vividly described. Nandi, the only associate mentioned by name, is described in 13:14-89 as one who holds the trident and looks like a second Shiva. Apart from these followers, Shiva is also associated with some gods and sages, to each of whom he stands in a distinct relationship. Of his two forms, the malign monster-like one is Vishnu, Agni, and the sun, while the benign one is water, the luminaries, and the moon. He once sent the irate Durvasas to deputize for him in Svetaki's sacrifice. During Tripura Dahana, Vishnu became Shiva's arrow together with Agni and Shoma. When Prajapati was emitting the fire of his anger, Shiva tried to assuage his wrath. Out of the controlled fury was born the woman Death. Shiva's identity with the sun has been emphasized in verse 12 to 84:15. Again in 14.8.16, where Shiva is Bhaskara and Vaishvanara Mukha. His association with fire and the sun are made clear. When Shiva practices penance, Agni encircled on all sides for 1000 years, standing on one foot and plaguing the other gods. Again, when Shiva came to ask Brahman why he meditated in Vaijayanta, he is described as Brahmana's son, born of the latter's forehead. More important are Shiva's association with Yama and Kala. When Arjuna asked Vyasa who it was who went before him, slaying the even enemy before Arjuna fought them, Vyasa replied, "He is the first Prajapati," and went on describing Shiva in a way which virtually identified Shiva with death. He is called Rudra, Shiva, Agni, Indra, Vayu, and the Ashwins, the lightning, the cloud, the moon, Bhava, Isanas, Varupa, the sun, days and nights, Kala, Antaka, Mrityu. He is specifically identified with Kala, whose bow is the year and whose bowstring the night of death. The year meaning one sal, ek sal. His bow is the year and the bowstring is the night of death. What fascinating concepts. Again, Shiva is death, the sharp knife, Karman, the destroyer of friends and foes alike, as the apocalyptic cloud. Bowstring, the night of death. An account of Shiva's origin says that grandfather Brahman had created Shiva together with the 7 sages. In another episode, Brahman praises Shiva and confesses that he is supreme. And strangely enough, another episode reverses the orders of creation, making Shiva the creator of Brahman from his right side, while from his left he created Vishnu. This account goes on to state that during the final dissolution, Shiva will devour creation. Although he is who created the universe, it is he who created the universe, at the end he will draw in everything including memory. Many new epithets appear for the first time in the epic describing his appearance, functions and exploits. Thus he is the destroyer of Bhaga's eyes, Savitra's arms and Pushana's teeth. He is referred to as extremely violent in temper, fully armed, indomitable, a destroyer of those hostile to Brahmanas, Uma's husband, the creator, the lord of the yakshas, all-hearing, all-pervading, with pointed ears, the lord of elephants, greedy of cooked meat and rice, fond of lutes and lyres, having fine raiments and garlands, quarrel-maker, a panchala, greedy of fetus flesh like a jackal, with a 1,000-pointed pike, preserver of children and their keeper, a toy to the youngsters, pleased with the 6 rites, engaged in the 3 activities. These are so many descriptions of Shiva. The subject and the discourser of talks centering around dharma, kama, artha and moksha. Having a definite weakness for chess, lord of the ganas, kama, fond of kanikara garlands, drinker of poison and fire, of nectar and death and of caramel, pot-bellied. He has clouds in his hair, rivers in all joints, the 4 seas under his arms. He enters Rahu's mouth and drinks Soma at night. As Swarvabhanu, he swallows the sun. When Shiva was initiated for the destruction of the 3 cities, Ushanas cut off his locks, hair locks, which became snakes and tormented him so that the neck became blue. Also in the previous creation, Narayana's grip around the neck had turned it blue. He is credited with being the source of all knowledge. Through his blessings, many sages became authors. He himself is closely associated with learning. In the 4th month falls the festival of Brahman and also of Shiva. He is said to have burnt Cupid to ashes. One of the new epic associations of Shiva is that with snakes. It was implied before in the Vedas but becomes more explicit now. In verse 778-10, his weapons emerge out of lake water in the shape of snakes. In 148-22, we hear that Astika grew up delighting the snakes like Shiva. he has snakes all over the body. And he is himself snake formed. Vyala Rupa and Vyala Dabarka. I can't read those letters. He is snake hooded, huge in form, sharp of teeth, venomous, with the neck encircled with a bowstring, but has, however, a human shape. Shiva is styled as garlanded with snakes, Sarpa Kantopahara, and also relieving the pain and poison of snake bite, Sarpatinasa. Okay, a comment has come. If you read Rudra Mantra and its translation properly, you can understand better how elements came to be as per science and as per Rudra is somewhat similar. I see. Okay, yeah, interesting. I had never thought of reading the mantra in a translated version. The Vedic Rudra was not an ascetic himself, but the epic Shiva is. Epic Shiva meaning the Shiva of Mahabharata. He is quite frequently mentioned as engaged in deep meditation. When he is commissioned by Brahman to create, or before the destruction of the 3 cities, or again when Arjuna or Upamanyu sees him, he is sitting in detached philosophical isolation. When millions of saints clamored for a vision of Rudra, he meditates and creates a million replicas of himself to gratify their desire of seeing him first. The Rudra Koti episode. Shiva is also the founder of a new cult with its philosophy known as Pashupata. He tells Daksha that he received it through meditation. We are familiar with 11 Rudras. Even in the epics, there are quite a few references to these. In all major hymns to Shiva, they are mentioned. Quote, we have seen many, actually 11 Rudras. We have seen many, actually 11 Rudras, all holding pikes and with matted hair, but I do not know this Maheshwara. End quote. Again in 12.359, Shiva manifesting his glory to Narendra, to Narada says, quote, look at the 11 Rudras at my right side. End quote. Mention of the Rudras in the plural number is not rare. They are even said to be 1100 in number 13 in verse 13, 14, 390. 1100 Rudras. Shiva is the lord of all the Rudras. Parvati does not appear as Shiva's consort in the Vedas. Even in the Kenopanishad and the Mundaka, passages 1, 2 and 4, she is just Haimavati Uma Haimavati without any reference to Shiva as her husband. But in the epics, that is in Ramayana Mahabharata, Shiva is almost everywhere accompanied by Parvati. Not only does Parvati appear together with Shiva, she is in the epics an independent goddess in her own right. Mahadevi Shikhara is a pilgrimage sanctioned by her presence, Mahadevi Shikhara. Yudhishthira sings a hymn to Durga on his way to Viratanagara. In this hymn, we have a series of epithets which do not tally with our notion of Uma as the daughter of Himalaya and the wife of Uma as the daughter of Himalaya or wife of Shiva. And in the hymns, she is neither. In the Vedas, that is. And yet later, this Durga becomes Uma. In the above hymn, she is Yashoda's daughter, Narayana's beloved. In the above hymn, she is in the Vedic hymns, she is Yashoda's daughter, Narayana's beloved. Born in the line of cowherd Nanda, she makes the line increase. She is the destroyer of Kangsha, the Rakshasa. When she was hurled against a stone, she flew up to heaven. She is sister to Vasudeva, bearer of sword and shield, dark, a virgin, Brahmacharini, resembling the rising sun, her face like the full moon, four-armed, four-faced, with bangles of peacock tufts, with bracelets and armlets on, a sky rover, dark like a dark portrait, with a face like Shankarsanas, Shankarsanas, with huge arms, high like Indra's banner, with a lotus and a bell, crowned with a marvelous headdress, with a waistband of snakes, a flag of peacock tufts. She protects heaven with her vow of chastity, is the killer of the buffalo demon, has her permanent residence on a mountain top in the Vindhya ranges. Yes, this is the Vindhyavashini. Goddess Vindhyavashini was converted into Durga. Okay, another comment is saying, there are verses like Rudra creates universe, may I become fire, may I become many more, may I become water, may I become etc etc. I see. Okay, interesting. So all the basic elements. So here we are talking about Devi Vindhyavashini. In the Vindhya ranges, is fond of wine, meat and animals, a savior in extreme danger. Another comment is saying, in science also it's like first we get hydrogen and the same hydrogen under immense pressure became helium and goes on and on till all elements were born. This is how I came to know when I visited. This is what I came to know when I visited a show in planetarium. I see, yeah. So we are talking about Vindhyavashini, fond of wine, meat, animals, savior in extreme danger. She is a vicious goddess. In Bhishma Parvan, when Krishna asked Arjuna to propitiate Durga, to pray to Durga, we have another account of her. Here all the previous epithets are repeated and some new ones are added. Among these are dweller in Mandara, with human skulls on her body, Chandi, Katyayani, cruel, armed with a fierce pike, younger sister to the cowherd king, fond of buffalo's blood, with a yellow robe on Kaushiki, that is Shiva's wife, with the face of a ruddy goose or a cuckoo or wolf, fair, dark, wife of the fire god, greatest of the various Vidyas, the great sleep of men, that is death, mother of Skanda, permanent resident of the netherworld, the evening, etc. When the hymn is over, she appears and blesses Arjuna with invincibility. One is reminded of Ramachandra's prayer to her in a similar crisis with a similar result. She blessed Krishna too with a son, Samba. In verse 13, 15, 39. In 13:146-33, Durga delivers a sermon on the duties of virtuous women. She is associated with the phallic worshippers, where it says that the great goddess Parvati is the supreme deity of the followers of the phallic cult. Parvati is dressed like Hara and has the same vow, has a gold pitcher filled with the water of all the holy places. She is said to have pressed Shiva's eyes in sport when a third eye appeared. It burned the Himalaya. She was grieved for her father, and so Shiva restored it. At one place she is related to Varuna and is called Gauri. Her union with Shiva is conceptually carried to an extreme in certain passages, where the couple is described as one figure, Shiva in the right half and Gauri in the left. Skanda in the epic supplants, in the Mahabharata, in the epics, supplants the Maruts as Rudra's son, because in the Vedas, at least in Rig Vedas, I don't remember, not in Rig Veda, in the other Vedas, Maruta is described as Rudra's son, but now Skanda becomes Rudra's son. The longest account of his birth is given in 224, where we hear that Agni desired the wives of the 7 sages. Swaha was in love with Agni, so she assumed the forms of all the 7 sages' wives, except that of Arundhati, and thus received the seed 6 times. Later she brought forth a son out of it. This was Skanda. Okay, let's read this part once again. The longest account of the birth of Skanda, that is Rudra's son. We hear that Agni desired the wives of the 7 sages. Swaha was in love with Agni, so she assumed the forms of all the 7 sages. So Swaha was in love with Agni and she assumed the forms of the wives of all the 7 sages, except that of Arundhati, and thus received the seed 6 times. Later she brought forth a son out of it. This was Skanda. Shiva also came to his aid. Swaha claimed the son as her own. The 7 virgins, daughter of the Tapas fire, reared him. Rudra gave him a garland fashioned by Vishwakarman. The story says that Shiva had entered Agni's body and created Skanda. When Swaha desired a son, Skanda united her with Agni. Brahman sent Skanda to Shiva and told him that Rudra as Agni and Swaha as Uma had begotten and born him for the benefit of the whole world. Rudra as Agni, Swaha as Uma. Born him for the benefit of the whole world. In 944, we have another variant of the same tale. It says that fire, unable to bear Rudra's seed, deposited it in the Ganges, who again laid it down on the bank. It was seen by Kritikas among the bulrushes, and the child that came of the seed was brought up by them. Yet another account says that the Ganges, unable to bear Agni's seed, that Ganga, unable to bear Agni's seed, fainted. Some water spirit roared, and the Ganga shook with fear, and refused to carry it. Agni asked her what it was like. She said it was like fire, like gold. Later, the child was brought up by the Kritika. The seed had fallen, so the child was called Skanda. Brought up by the Kritika, he is Kartikeya. Kartik. They hid him in a cave, and hence he is Guha. Cave in Bengali is a Guha actually. His origin, however, was disputed. Some call him Maheshwara's son, others Agni's. Uma, Kritikas and Ganga all claim to be his mothers. He is even called the son of Revati. The sun's rays bore part of the seed to the trees and the sea and the sea, and some fell on land. So many kinds of ganas were created. These have to be worshipped with Arka Pushpa. Then follows a list of the different names of Skanda. He dwells in Rohitaka, where the Mattamayurakas, a tribe with the peacock as their totem, worshipped him, and is seated on a peacock. Shiva is not only worshipped in his proper person, he is worshipped as a phallic deity also, where the erect organ also represents him. A passage in 7.292.6 tells us of the merits of such worship. It should be taken to mean the prime principle of life. In the next chapter, we hear that Shiva practices chastity, and this pleases saints, gods and Gandharvas, so they worship his linga. He is called Sthanu because his linga is fixed in the erect position. Linga worship has been suggested to have been an alternative for image worship. Brahman once appointed Shiva to create the universe. Accepting the commission, Shiva sank beneath the water to meditate and remained there for a long time. Impatient at this delay, Brahman appointed another creator and had the work completed by him. Then at length, Shiva came out of the water. And found the task already accomplished. So he planted his linga on the earth and was about to retire. At Brahma's enquiry, he replied that his penance had been undertaken in order to provide food for the creatures before they were created. Then in great anger, he retired to Mount Munjavat. Another episode tells us how Ushanas became Shukra. Shiva, displeased with Ushanas's misdeeds, put him in his mouth and swallowed him. Ushanas suffered much in Shiva's stomach and was allowed to make his exit through the lings. He came out blazing white. Shiva in anger tried to kill him, but Parvati called him son, and so he was spared. There are epiphallic descriptions of Shiva, also as destroyer and lord of the lings. His linga is marked with yoni. Shiva is unique in that it is only his linga that is worshipped by the gods. Men and women belong to him because they are either male or female, the linga symbolizing both. So it's not a patriarchy thing. The Vedas give a mouse to Shiva. In the Vedas, Shiva has a mouse as his individual animal associate. In the epic, it is the bull in the Mahabharatas. During Tripura Dahana, we hear this bull roaring. Shiva put up a bull sign in his flag. Then bull is his close associate. It is described in all its strength and splendor in 13:14 to 40:43, and the description gradually tends to identify the god with his beast, till in verse 46 the equation is complete. Analyzing the purely epic features of Rudra in the Mahabharata, we find that they may not have all sprung from the same source. The Rigvedic Rudra yields to the Yajurveda, and even this later Vedic Rudra imbibes traits from diverse sources. His feat of burning the 3 cities, for example, resembles the exploits of Indra. The cities have been described as affluent and prosperous, the demon rulers apparently invincible. Now Shiva, like Indra, the warrior leader, Shiva is the warrior leader of the last horde of the IE people, of the Indo-European people, I guess, who entered India between. This is based on the assumption that Aryan invasion happened or Aryan migration happened. Aryan migration may have as well happened. Everyone was migrating everywhere. Indo-European people who entered entered India between 1700 to 1400 BC. The emergence of the Indo-Aryan must be shown to have aided the forefathers of the epic people before he gains admission into their pantheon. So Shiva is supposed to be the warrior leader of the horde of the Indo-European people. Thus he kills demons or gives weapons for their destruction. As Rudra, his claim is not disputed. Yet a Brahmana passage says that when the other gods attained heaven, Rudra was left behind. The destruction of Daksha's sacrifice because he was left out may be a record in the public memory of the struggle of the Vedic Aryans and some tribal people, some of whose gods were slowly being absorbed in the Aryan pantheon. One or more important organic component of the epic concept of Shiva must have been lent him by one or more tribal gods, so that at the first formative stage of the epic mythology, Shiva was extraneous to the pantheon. The Satpath Brahman tells us that Sarva was a name of Agni among the eastern people, and that Bhava was used among the Balikas, that is in the Afghanistan regions, Bactrians. Balikas, which suggests that in Rudra they have combined the forms of different but kindred gods. Kindred gods meaning similar familial gods. Same features, etc. A reference to the cult of Rudra by the Vratyas has been seen as the expansion of the curious Vratya hymn of the Atharva Veda and of the ceremonies which are used for the introduction into the Vedic religious life of the non-Brahmanical Aryans. The question, however, does arise whether in the late Rudra we have not syncretism. We don't have the syncretism of more than one deity and possibly the influence of aboriginal worship on the Aryan. All presumptions of Aryan migration. The Daksha Yajna episode, therefore, may be interpreted as the record of the Aryan reluctance to include Shiva among their gods, although as Rudra, his Vedic counterpart, received his due share in the sacrifices. He is, as Barth calls him, not Brahmanic. Characterizing the epic and post-epic conceptions of Shiva, he says, "We can conceive nothing more lifelike than the figure that stands out from this piece of Vedic realism, but nothing at the same time less Brahmanic." Of Shiva as the god of the Vratya hymns, Bloomfield says, there can be no doubt that he is in reality Brahma, but section 5, which introduces the murtis of Rudra, shows it to be under Shaivite influence. Happy Shivratri to you, nihilist trader. There can be no doubt that he is in reality Brahma, but section 5, which introduces the murtis of Rudra, shows it was done under Shaivite influence. The symbolic significance of the fact that the social outcasts, the Vratyas, found in Rudra a champion of their cause is obvious, as the dominion of the Vedic Aryans was being consolidated, as they were bringing larger and larger tracts under their social and political influence. They were receiving fresh social and religious impact from the newcomers. They had to absorb not only other tribal people but also new tribal gods and cultic forms of worship. This explains the entry of Rudra on the one hand and the Vratyas on the other. The new direction in the development of Shiva starts with the Krishna Yajur Veda, but is more clearly in the Atharva Veda, where the stamp of tribal gods on his personality is unmistakably impressed. It is quite in keeping with the Atharva Veda that instead of gaining any new theological or philosophical feature, Rudra gains in the dark magic and mysterious attributes here. And Bloomfield, commenting on the trend of the Vedas in general, says that, quote, in striking contrast with the vigorous though peculiar development of theosophic speculations in the Atharva Veda is its barrenness on the side of purely mythological fancy. The Rig Veda deals with the gods of nature as the theme of its poetry. The Atharvan cultivates the more homely genie or substitutes demonology. The character of the leading divinities of the Rig Veda, Agni, Indra, Surya, is scarcely developed at all, barring the undoubtedly popular advance of the fusion of Agni with Rudra, in the direction which finally produced the god Shiva. Besides changing his character, Rudra has grown in stature. He represents the syncretism of many gods, and it is possible to analyze a few of the component divinities. Are you guys understanding what's going on here? Even if whatever their claim is, even if we take into account that Aryan migration happened, that the so-called Indo-European Aryans came from a distant land, came here, even then what you are seeing here is the beauty of and diversity of Hinduism at work, because they are saying Shiva was amalgamating all the local gods, tribal gods, etc., which is pretty debatable. These are not set in stone, but even if their claim is true, even then Hinduism is so awesome. That is the proof here, because they are not saying that screw your god, forget your god, convert to our gods. They are saying yes, our gods are a different version of your gods are a different version of our gods. Can you believe how beautiful that is? Can you realize can you acknowledge, can you feel how beautiful that is? I'm reading a paper written by a Marxist, which is ending up defending the beauty of the Hindu framework, the dharmic framework, which we need to protect with the help of Hindutva. Besides changing his character, Rudra has grown in stature. He represents the syncretism of many gods, and it is possible to analyze a few of the component divinities. Component divinities means what were the components of the divinity. The first thing that strikes us in the changed epic personality, that is in the Mahabharata personality of Shiva or Rudra, is that he is an established hero with particular exploits to his credits, like the destruction of the cities and of Daksha's sacrifice, the killing of Andhaka, the holding of the Ganges, and the discomfiture of Mankanaka. Similarly, his habits and habitat, his divine, animal, and superhuman associates are all well established. This may have been due to the fact that one of the gods of this new syncretism was a mountain deity of some northern tribes. Even now, Shiva is generally worshipped in the mountain regions. Yes. One of the gods of this new syncretism was a mountain deity of some northern tribes. His uncanny and baleful traits have, however, also been explained as starting from the conception of a deity of mountain and forest whence storm and disease attack man and beast. And naturally, his wife is Parvati, daughter of the mountain. There may have been a couple of deified hunters at the back of this concept. Okay, so now Shiva is becoming a more North Indian, the hilly regions of India, the Devbhumi area. He's becoming a god of those places. The epic Rudra, the Mahabharata version of Rudra, whose beginning was seen in the Yajur Veda, for the first time has certain habits and associations which are in direct contrast to the concept of a god in the Vedic sense. Here we have a god clad in an animal hide, with matted hair, carrying a trident and seated on a bull. This also has aboriginal and tribal associations. It has nothing in common with the Vedic Rudra, nor can it follow from anything recognizably Vedic Aryan in religion. This is just the opinion of this particular author. This is not a fact. This image tallies perfectly with that of an ascetic, which Shiva is, for, quote, He is also par excellence the god of asceticism and austerities, end quote. Dr. S.K. Dey, in his article on sects and sectarian worship in the Mahabharata, says that the epic philosophy was Samkhya Yoga with Ishvara as the 25th principle. This is a curious medley of two unrelated systems. The Ishvara here is not the pure abstraction of the later systems, but is so nebulous and ill-defined that the concept of Yogadhyaksha Shiva fits this pattern. The Pashupati system, says Dr. Dey in the same article, emphasizes, quote, emotional realization more than mere knowledge. I was lucky enough to learn Sri Rudram of Yajurveda when I was a kid. Always feels good to chant Vedic mantras. I see. Interesting. So you see, these are pretty Marxist historian perspectives here going on, but even then they are saying that how can you conciliate these kind of seemingly contradictory concepts. But that is the beauty of Hinduism here, that people agreed upon to just call their gods their own gods, other people's gods their own gods, and built up this civilizational state where everyone is worshipping everyone's gods. The emphasis on the ascetic side of his nature may have been due to various reasons. Shiva may have been the central deity of an ascetic brotherhood, or a regional god may have been endowed with his attribute in the process of being raised to a universal status. Also, as one section of Shaivism later branched off into Tantricism, asceticism may have been the natural, even indispensable counterpart of the orgiastic ritual of the other side. The orgiastic side of his nature is best symbolized by his image as Bhairava or Kala Bhairava, ecstatically dancing his dithyrambic Tandava dance with his ghost companions. The lurid atmosphere of such a dance is perhaps reminiscent of some cultic rituals. In the epic, Shiva has been described as addicted to song, music and dance, and his dance has been interpreted as cosmic, but who knows whether behind it there was not originally a tribal festival. So these are just assumptions. There is absolutely no proof of these being tribal in nature, or what is a tribe, that is also very questionable, because people used to, it's not like people who live in forests today used to live in forests back then. So the author is conflating so-called tribal forest dwellers of today with tribal forest dwellers of 7,000 years back. In the epic, Shiva is almost always mentioned with his host, and these are not the Maruts with whom he is associated in the Vedas, but the deformed and hideous legion symbolizing disproportionate deformity, subhumanity and death. These share and reflect on a lower plane the new features of the epic Shiva, whose association with them has clear traces of borrowing from some ethnic god characteristics. In his connection with them and the cremation ground, Shiva assumes new traits and becomes closely linked with death. As a god of the north, he is not Yama, who is a resident of the south, yet he shares some characteristics with him in a very complex fashion. Parvati is the killer of the buffalo demon, and the buffalo is Yama's beast. Yama is Kala, and Parvati later became Kali, Shiva being quite frequently called Kala. The Badami and Ellora cave temples represent Bhringi and Kala as Shiva's attendants. Shiva has been more than once mentioned as the god entrusted with the task of cosmic dissolution. His Ghora Tanu leads to his association with Agni in the Vedic and later Vedic literature, presumably because Agni too has been conceived as the agent of the final dissolution. His followers have some bearing on this task. They are both ghastly, death-like in appearance, and pleasant, as if they represent both good and bad spirits. At the back of these spirits there may have been a faith in metempsychosis, for, quote, we find this worship of the dead among the Hellenists. Okay. Hellenes, among the Latins, among the Etruscans. We also find it among the Aryans of India. His followers have some bearing on this task. They are both ghastly, death-like in appearance, and pleasant. What do you think about Soros' statement? Soros wants to flutter some feathers. I don't see how it's not going to have much effect. It's going to give the Hindutva people more of an excuse to point out the meddling characteristics of the American left, because George Soros is a pretty leftist and liberal, so-called liberal guy. At least he's anti-right wing, anti-nationalism, etc. In the epic pantheon in the Mahabharatas, Shiva enjoys a unique position. He is said to be Brahman's son, and Brahman is called the grandfather Pitamaha. Although it is nowhere stated explicitly, yet the unspoken assumption is that in the hierarchy of the gods, Shiva enjoys an intermediary position. He is conceived as the father of the world, with Parvati as the mother goddess, Jaganmata. Shiva was summoned for the task of creation. He is the refuge in times of crisis. He is the father of Skandha, and later his fatherhood is extended to cover a family of 4 children. As the only god who is almost always accompanied by his wife, Shiva is easily thought of as the father of the world. Brahman is gradually dwindling. Into comparative insignificance, and theologically his place is being occupied by Shiva. At this interesting period of a settled agrarian community, when the cosmic forces represented by the Rigvedic gods are being transformed into personal gods, it is but natural that Shiva should gain in importance and stature, as he is the figure which easily lends itself to the concept of universal fatherhood. At this particular stage, when the Indian pantheon is gradually giving way to the supreme triad, Brahma, Vishnu and Maheshwara, the inconspicuous Vedic god, simple and linear in execution in the Vedas, will naturally be filled out with all the necessary theological details and become a major god. As a result, we have the inscrutable phenomenon of the association of opposites in him. He is both benign and malign, dark and fair, terrible and gentle, life and death. This combination of the polarities of the conceptual world is necessary to make him awe-inspiring and mysterious. Thus, from comparative insignificance, Rudra gains in dimensions still passing through the stage of what Keith calls kathenotheism. He is proclaimed the supreme being. What precisely is at the bottom of this? Syncretism of deities, that is, mixing up of different religious customs. Syncretism of deities is so common and notorious that it seems strange to find so much reluctance to accept what is notoriously a trait of post-Vedic Shiva, whose cosmopolitan character enables him to absorb local god after god. It is certainly possible that a forest and mountain deity of some kindred god, such as a vegetation spirit and even a god of the dead, may be united with the Vedic lightning god to form the composite figure of the Yajurveda. This is a beautiful aspect of Hinduism. This aspect of the vegetation deity is closely associated with the worship of Rudra's symbol, the phallus. Phallic worship is not an isolated phenomenon in India. Over large tracts of land and over long periods of time, people have worshipped the phallus as a symbol of fertility and virility. We know the Egyptian Ohem, Munt and Amun, who were worshipped ithiphallically. In Rome, Priapus was later represented as the phallus. Worship of the detached phallus was popular in Babylonia. At Harappa, stone phallic symbols have been found. Mohenjo-daro and the Indus Valley Civilization. This was a citation from that book. In the Far East, phallic worship was quite prevalent in Indochina, and Prilewski in his book Non-Aryan Loans and Pre-Aryan and Pre-Dravidian says, quote, "The phallic cults of which we know the importance in the ancient religions of Indochina are generally considered to have been derived from Indian Shaivism." हाई भाई अभी आया, किस बारे में बात कर रहे हो? We are discussing the evolution of Rudra from the Vedas up till the Mahabharatas, how the characteristics, his capabilities, all of that changed, and how much of Shiva is really Rudra. We are discussing a paper written by a Sanskrit scholar who is fluent in Sanskrit, Greek, Pali, etc. This is a paper from 1960. Just 7 more pages left. This was a 44-page paper. We are done with most of it. 7 more pages to go. The phallic cults of which we know the importance in ancient religions of Indochina are generally considered to have been derived from Indian Shaivism. It is more probable that the Aryans borrowed from the Aborigines of India the cult of Linga as well as the name of the idol. This seems more probable when we think of the actual Vedic references to the term Shishnadeva. That is, the curt manner of the references to Shishnadeva in the Vedas indicates the non-Aryan nature of the phallic cult. But how did Shiva come to be associated with this particular symbol? For all over India, this is one of the forms in which Shiva is worshipped even now, and Allen has definitely described the symbol on an uninscribed coin as the lingam on square pedestal, the 3rd and 2nd century BC, if not earlier. Shiva and his early emblems on early Indian coins by J.N. Banerjee, IHQ 1940. There are anecdotes in the Mahabharata to explain Shiva's association with the phallus, but that is the penis, but we must probe deeper in order to find the source of the symbol. Shiva, one remembers, is almost invariably connected with Parvati. Now Durga, who in the later mythology, the regular consort of Shiva, has in the Mahabharata mythology very little in common with Parvati. Once or twice where she is called Skandamata, and Skanda is never directly described as Shiva's offspring, although he is inferentially presented as such. Durga therefore is at best only inferentially related to Shiva as his spouse. But Durga in the Mahabharata, in her own right, a fierce goddess sharing many primitive and horrible traits with Shiva, because she is Vindhyavashini, her partiality for blood, fat and flesh, etc., her love of the repugnant, her hunting and demon-killing traits. Both she and Shiva have associations with the phallic symbol. Nanimadhav Chaudhary, in his article on Linga worship in the Mahabharata, says, quote, "It is our opinion that the assimilation of the phallus cult with the old Vedic cult of Rudra is owing to the previous association of the latter cult with the mother goddess." Okay, this is an interesting perspective. The only reason these people are saying that the so-called Aryan or Vedic people associated themselves with the phallus worshipping people is because the phallus worshipping people also worshipped mother goddesses, who were also associated with other Vedic goddesses. With this, we come upon another component concept of this interesting syncretism. Through his association with Parvati, Shiva changes from the Vedic Rudra, loosely connected with Prishni or Go, Aditi in the Ramayana and Surabhi in the Harivamsha, in whom he begets the Maruts. The mother goddess concept is pre-Indo-European and is a very, very old concept in the history of the world. In Egyptian history, we have Isis carrying Hippocrates or Horus, sometimes represented as a young suckling. We also remember how during Tripura Dahana episode, Shiva was suddenly seen as a baby in Parvati's arms. At Harappa has been found a goddess of earth and vegetation, sacrifices to whom seem to be in conjunction with the nature of the goddess of earth and mother goddess, and her bloody cult, orgiastic dances, castration, etc., customs known from Asia Minor. The goddess to whom human sacrifices were brought is likely to belong, as Shiva does, to the cultural sphere of Asia Minor. The cruel goddess Durga is her old Indian analogue. W. Porzig suspects the origin of Shiva, god of mountains and storm, as well as of his wife Parvati or Durga, to have belonged to Asia Minor. It is therefore no accident that Durga came to be associated with Shiva in the epics. When the Indo-Europeans came to India, they brought or fashioned Rudra, who, as the storm god, quite naturally took over the attributes and associations of his West Asian analogue. When the name is changed from Rudra to Shiva, much else changes. With the increasing use of this epithet Shiva, the malevolence of Rudra becomes more prominent in the later Vedas. The white Yajurveda, which adds various disgraceful attributes, furnishes the transition to the terrific and repulsive Shiva of Hindu mythology. Among the Shiva's animal associates may be mentioned his gaping-mouthed dogs. Now, as the god of death, he is entitled to dogs. In Greek mythology, the dog is called Kerberos, and in Egyptian mythology, this dog is Anubis, the conductor of the dead. Anubis has been at times represented as jackal-faced in Egyptian monuments, and we remember Shiva in the epic being called Svargala Mukha, among his gaping mouth. Among his animal associates are dogs and jackals too. Did you hear the George Soros controversy? Yes. I heard the George Soros controversy. It's not very important. No one cares in India. And George Soros is a liberal, but he's a rich guy, so even commies can't defend him. And I don't see how it does anything other than uniting Hindus further to claim that, see, the West is after you, the West is jealous of you, etc. It has no other relevance. Of the other animal followers of Shiva, the mouse later came to be associated with his Puranic son Ganesha. In the epic, this Ganesha is yet unborn. Shiva has himself been called Ganesha and Ganapati and has the mouse to himself. Both Shiva and Parvati are closely associated with snakes, as has been shown before. Now, the snake cult in the ancient world is a much explored subject. In very ancient times, the serpent was the cult sign or religious emblem of a tribe inhabiting a site in the Egyptian delta, the capital of which was at Buto. The Cretan mother goddess with a pair of snakes in her hand is well known. In the Mahabharata, India perhaps preserves the memory of a snake cult, whatever its source. The snake goddess Manasha, who has survived the old pantheon, is popularly supposed to be Shiva's daughter, who is worshipped pretty commonly in West Bengal by Bengalis, in Bangladesh as well. Snakes were the Dravidian emblem of death and fertility, and 5-headed snakes formed a canopy of the linga on some archaeological specimens of ancient India. Shiva has snakes all over him, and Parvati also uses snake coils as ornaments. It is significant that as Mahakala and Mahakali, they both have associations with snakes, which directly symbolizes death. The bull also is a very old symbol of strength, vegetation, and reproduction. It has always been connected with the pantheon of primitive agrarian communities. In Egypt, Apis was the sacred bull worshipped in Memphis. When the sacred animal died, a successor was chosen. There were certain signs by which he, Apis, was recognized to be the god. Bulls are considered the property of the god Epaphos or Apis and are therefore tested in the following way. If the priest finds a single black hair upon him, he pronounces him unclean. If the animal passes all the tests successfully, the priests mark him. It reminds us of the present-day custom of dedicating the spotless bull to Shiva, and also of the bull released to save the dead from hell, Vrishota Sarga, a custom the date of whose origin is unknown. The old death association of Shiva persists. Shiva is always associated with death. The Rigvedic Rudra did not have a bull but was seated in a chariot. The bull, therefore, is a later addition. Among the Indus Valley coins, the bull as a symbol is depicted on the reverse side of a unique gold coin of an Indo-Scythian king bearing legends in Greek and Kharoshthi script Taurus and Usabha, both standing for Shiva. This reminds us of the same device appearing on the coins of the white Hun ruler Mihragula, with the legend Jayatu Vrisha in the script of the period. Of Shiva's weapons, the bow and arrows are gradually superseded by the epic trident and battle axe, with which he is seen on certain copper coins issued by the Kuninda Republic of the 2nd and 1st century BC. A round copper seal discovered at Sirkap shows him with a club, where he resembles Heracles and bears testimony to the Hellenistic treatment. A Kushana Vasudeva gold coin is interesting in that it shows him with a noose meaning a rope. Here Rudra Shiva has clear connections with Yama, the traditional bearer of the noose. Even Wonder Woman has a noose. We thus have a composite godhead whose different and sometimes disparate parts have travelled from distant land and whose attributes have accumulated from pre-Aryan, Aryan and non-Aryan tribal peoples over a long period of time. The resulting syncretism offers contradictory traits but has gradually been assimilated in the Indian pantheon till in the Shiva Mahaskanda and the Devi Bhagavata Puranas we have the picture of a god belonging to the supreme triad worshipped all over India, ruling all spheres of life in his theological and everyday ritual aspects. This god does not grow or change in essence after he has received final shape in the epics. The naturistic and animistic traits about him are shed in the epics in the Mahabharata. His naturistic and animistic characteristics are eliminated in the Mahabharata, and he is more humanized than in the Vedas. He is in the Mahabharata an ascetic living a retired life. He is the god who relieves people in distress if they practice penance and approach him with humility. He has weapons which he himself seldom uses but which are yet his to grant to a worthy supplicant. He is no longer the protector of cattle, although he becomes the lord of animals. Neither is he healer any longer, although as one of the three supreme gods, he is almighty and can heal also. Rudra in the epics had been denied a share in the sacrifices, something unthinkable about any of the Vedic gods, and enraged at this insult, he shows his might, thus forcing an acknowledgement of his otherwise unrecognized divinity. A comment has come. What do you think Indian Vedic studies goes to Europe or European polytheism come to India? Or there is connection between both of them because we found Shivalinga or swastika even in Turkey. Yes. Everyone used to worship erections and phallic symbols of some sorts everywhere. And Vedic studies, nothing was united and concrete in a form so that they could go there or that could come here. People were traveling all the time. It was a very globalized and connected world. It's just that it took more time to go those places because trade was happening between Greeks, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, everywhere. So why would the artists or religious people or scholars just not go anywhere else? They were also traveling here and there. Ideas were being exchanged. Everything was going on everywhere. There was no such thing as, Hinduism came from outside here or Hinduism was born here and then went outside. It was all an accumulation of all gradual building up and accumulation of different kinds of ideas. But what is the problem with the main aspect of our discussion has to be that this interchange of ideas of different places, different cultures, different lands is what Hinduism embodies. This is what no other religion today embodies. This is what every indigenous way of life used to embody before Abrahamic faiths went and colonized and destroyed their faith systems and created one god and one way to talk to them or worship them or pray to them. This is why Hinduism needs to be protected because Hinduism is the last framework of accepting and talking about different cultures and being the home to different kinds of gods and goddesses and cultures. In all these, we have a distinct transformation of the Vedic Rudra. In the first place, he is neither called nor thought of as a fierce storm god. The Brihad Devta and the what's that? I think some letter is missing. Still remember him as the howling god of storm and wind. In the epic, this trait is forgotten. The purely physical counterpart of his personality has been lost sight of entirely, or exists purely in memory. The young Vedic god of firm limbs, beautiful lips, braided hair, dazzling shape, of almost sun-like brilliance, dressed finely with a gold necklace, and seated in a chariot, has now become a skin-clad ascetic, wrapped in penance, quiet and retiring, away from human habitation, followed not by the gods called Maruts, but by hideous demons. Triambaka he still is, but instead of having 3 mothers, which indicates his identity with Agni originating in 3 places, he has now 3 eyes. Ambika, who was a sister to the Vedic Rudra, is now a synonym for his wife Parvati. What has actually happened to the Vedic Rudra? Not one but many things have happened before he is so altered. For clearer understanding, it is better to call him Rudra Shiva instead of calling him by either name singly. Already in the Yajurveda and in the it's some Purana, K-U-P, Katha Upanishad and Puranas, or Kena Upanishad Purana. KUP, he is prescribed as a malevolent god, a destroyer, if also a preserver. This is the point of departure. Hence we are introduced to the other non-Vedic deities, a vegetation god, a god of animals, a phallic god who is worshipped for fertility and strength, the goddess associate Parvati, and also other theological and philosophical concepts like Yogadhyaksha Shiva, the Ardhanarishvara, the Harihara, etc. This new composite god found the doors about to him. This new composite god found the doors shut to him in the pantheon. The memory of the struggle between this god and the traditionally accepted pantheon lingers in the episode of Daksha Yajnasa. As Daksha was an early progenitor of the Aryans, the episode gains in significance and becomes the story of early Aryan reluctance and later acceptance of one or many non-Vedic tribal gods. This new Shiva brought with him all his tribal characteristics and retains most of them, or those of them which would fit in with faint anticipatory Yajurvedic passages. One of the less important Vedic gods has been raised in the epics to a supreme position, has assumed new dimensions and attributes, has shed his old attributes, has a mother goddess for a consort, and the general of the divine army for a son. All this did not happen in a day. The Rigvedic society had moved from the days when the people sacrificed to the gods in the hope that, pleased with their sacrifices, the gods would move the forces of nature for their benefit, give them crops and cattle, sons and victory in war. Now in the epic age, the Mahabharata age, the Vedic gods have no longer the same function. Another force at once supreme and inelucidable has come into existence, namely fate, called by various names as Kala, Kritanta, Niyati, Bhagadheya. Within this framework of fatalism, people live and worship. The gods are still there. So now they are worshipping time, in a sense. Time and fate, etc. Destiny. The gods are still there and have the power to grant boons when propitiated, but fate rules supreme. It is immutable and explains all the anomalies of life, as is amply clear in the series of anecdotes regarding the complexities of life in the Shanti Parvan. Kathopanishad, where 9-year-old child challenged Yamraj. I see. The Rudra of only 2 entire hymns of the Rig Veda, Rudra, who was originally mentioned only in 2 entire hymns of the Rig Veda, has now gained immeasurable importance in the epic age, in the Mahabharata age, not only because he embodies in his person, not only because he embodies in his personality diverse divinities, but also because in his capacity as Mahakala, he is a personification of fate himself. As an inhabitant of the cremation ground and with spirits, that is bhutas, as his followers, he represents death, the most formidable shape in which fate can appear to man. All the gods of the supreme triad of the epic have this attribute. In some form or other, they may represent fate. It is this potentiality in their nature which lends itself to being identified with fate that has secured for them this supreme position, instead of comparative oblivion to which many Rigvedic gods were consigned. Now we understand why Rudra has gained this new importance. He has a dual personality, fierce and deadly as Rudra. He is at the same time a detached, gentle and benevolent deity as Shiva. As Rudra, he could easily be converted into the dark and malign aspect of death, and as Shiva, he could be made into the benign giver of life. Thus, with his Ghora and Shiva Tanu, he embodies in his person the dual principle of life and death. He is thus the closest approximation to the abstract concept of fate, the all-powerful, the concept which in the epic ages, in the Mahabharata ages, has, so to say, supplanted all other gods. That is the end of this paper, guys. Thanks for joining this live stream. This was a great way to celebrate Mahashivratri. We got into a perspective by a Sanskrit scholar called, what's her name? I mentioned her name in the video. I forgot her name. Sukumari Bhattacharji, I guess. So this is a paper written by her in 1960, and we learned about the evolution of the Rig Vedic Rudra to the Shiva of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. So this was a great experience, and I'll see you hopefully tomorrow night or day after tomorrow night. We'll have live streams very frequently now, from now on. I'm having fun with this. And we'll discuss Brahma Purana, Arthashastra, Manusmriti, everything live from 12 every night, whenever I do come. My conclusion is that a person is asking, what's your conclusion? My conclusion, I need to read a lot more than this, obviously. I need to read the primary sources itself. This was just one journal article by a scholar. So far, I'm in agreement with them. This was the Marxist historian perspective, basically. Let me remind you. This is a Marxist writing this paper. So they did not go out of their way to criticize or look down upon it in some way. They obviously believe in the concrete Aryan invasion, or Aryan migration at least, theory, that some people formed this, then they came here. That's not how I'm seeing it. There's too much evidence to suggest that that every similar kinds of things were being worshipped everywhere. So people are migrating here and there, ideas are migrating here and there. So all those things are happening. But the thing to note here only is that even if I take the Marxist perspective into this, what I'm noticing is that Hinduism is a gigantic framework for accommodating all sorts of people, as long as those people don't want to kill or harm other people, other worshippers of other gods and goddesses. This is the framework. This is what Hinduism is. This framework, this dharmic framework is what needs to be protected. And Abrahamic principles, Abrahamic faiths, cultures are absolutely opposed to this idea, this kind of framework. This is the framework that the world used to operate by, which got destroyed when colonization happened. Middle Eastern colonizations and European colonization and Mongolian, Central Asian, Middle Eastern colonizers. Middle Eastern coloniality, which got affected into Central Asians. But other than that, this is how the world used to operate. The entire world could be called Hindu in that sense back then. But this is what Hinduism now is. Hinduism is the last bastion. India is the last place for this framework. That is what my conclusion is, that yes, Rudra evolved by taking into account the characteristics of different other gods and heroes of the local lands. Did you hear Feluda Bombayer Bombete? Okay, Sunday Suspense. It's very interesting. I have read Bombayer Bombete. Is the Sunday Suspense version any different or something? Why would that be interesting, other than the fact that the story is pretty good in itself? So anyway, see you tomorrow or day after tomorrow night at 12 again. This was a great, fun live stream.